How did a prisoner sentenced to 110 years turn every prison guard into a laughingstock? No tunnels, no walls to climb. She needed only a glance, a few sweet words, and the blindness of one man. That night, when everything seemed calm and ordinary, Sarah Jo Pender walked out of the gates of Rockville Correctional Facility as if freedom's door had never been closed. An escape, without gunfire, without bloodshed, yet enough to send shockwaves across America. Before we continue, drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts about this story. And if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit like and share so more people can see it. Most importantly, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. We post fresh content every day at the same time. A dramatic story. In the history of American crime, there are prison escapes remembered for their recklessness, their meticulous planning, or their bloody violence. But there are also escapes that shocked the public, not because of gunfire, but because of how fragile trust can be. Trust in those who are tasked with guarding the very heart of the prison system, a place meant to be impenetrable. And among those escapes, one name cannot be ignored. Sarah Jo Pender, the female inmate dubbed the female Charles Manson for her manipulative skills, cunning mind, and ability to make others commit crimes on her behalf. Sarah Jo Pender is not only infamous for the 110-year sentence she received for murder, but also for her shocking escape in 2008. What turned her story into a national sensation was not just the ease of her escape, but the fact that the person who opened the door to her freedom was not another prisoner, not an outside accomplice, but a prison guard, the very man sworn to keep her inside. Escaping prison through a forbidden romantic relationship, Sarah transformed her story into living proof that love, or manipulation disguised as love, can be a weapon more powerful than knives or guns. Before she became an inmate, with a number attached to her name, splashed across front-page headlines, Sarah was once an ordinary girl in Indiana. Born in 1979, she had a relatively uneventful childhood, studied hard, and was described by friends and teachers as intelligent and ambitious. But her life took a sharp turn when she entered a relationship with Richard Edward Hull, a man with a violent past and reckless lifestyle. That relationship became the beginning of a 2-decade tragedy, ultimately leading to the prison escape that shook Indiana's correctional system. In 2002, Sarah was sentenced to 110 years in prison, accused of masterminding the murders of 2 roommates, Andrew Cataldi and Tricia Nordman, together with her boyfriend, Richard Hull. Prosecutors alleged that Sarah purchased the gun, encouraged Richard to commit the killings, and later helped dispose of the bodies. In the eyes of the court, she was not merely an accomplice, but the mastermind. The press branded her the female Charles Manson because of her psychological control over others, the way she could manipulate people into acting on her behalf. Sarah was transferred to Rockville Correctional Facility, one of Indiana's largest women's prisons. With such a heavy sentence, her future seemed permanently sealed behind bars. But for a woman like Sarah, prison was never the end. To her, it was simply another challenge, another stage on which to exploit the weaknesses of the system and of people. And the next person to fall victim to her manipulative charm would be Scott Spitler, a correctional officer with a wife and children, who lost everything because he believed the sweet words of the inmate he was supposed to guard. The story of Sarah Jo Pender is not just a tale of an escape. It is a warning about the danger of forbidden relationships, the failures of prison oversight, and above all, the way human emotions can be weaponized. It raises difficult questions. Was Sarah truly a master manipulator, a femme fatale capable of bending people to her will? Or was she, as she once claimed, a victim of an unforgiving legal system that unfairly crushed her youth under a sentence of more than a century? In this video, we will walk step by step through her case, from the initial crime, through her years behind bars, to the illicit romance with a guard, the night of her escape, and the bitter end when she was recaptured. This is not just the story of a woman running from prison walls. It is the story of the collapse of moral boundaries when trust is exploited, and of how love, in the wrong hands, can destroy everything in its path. Sarah Jo Pender's story did not begin in prison, but in a small Indianapolis apartment. In the year 2000, Sarah was just 21 years old, living with her boyfriend, Richard Edward Hull, and two roommates, Andrew Cataldi and Tricia Nordman. Conflicts over money, drugs, and lifestyle quickly turned the apartment into a pressure cooker. On October 25th, 2000, everything exploded. Richard shot and killed Andrew and Tricia right inside their home. According to prosecutors, Sarah was not only aware of the plan, but also the one who purchased the murder weapon. They claimed she encouraged Richard to go through with it, and afterward, she helped dispose of the bodies. The evidence against Sarah was not as direct as fingerprints on the gun, but it was enough to convince the court that she was the mastermind. Richard's testimony, incriminating letters, and the fact that she had purchased the weapon painted her as more than just a bystander. In the 2002 trial, Sarah received a sentence of 110 years in prison, a punishment so severe it would lock her away for life. The press immediately compared her to Charles Manson, the cult leader who had manipulated his followers into committing murders. From that moment, Sarah carried the infamous title of the female Charles Manson, a label that made her one of Indiana's most notorious female inmates. After the trial, Sarah was transferred to Rockville Correctional Facility, a large women's prison in Indiana. With a 110-year sentence, most assumed this would be where she would spend the rest of her life. But Sarah was different. She refused to accept the role of a powerless inmate. Using her intelligence, charm, and communication skills, she quickly built connections not only with fellow prisoners, but also with some correctional staff. To many, Sarah projected a rare confidence, even a sense of leadership, as though prison walls could not break her spirit. Other inmates recalled how Sarah had a way of speaking that made people feel special, as if she truly understood them. She knew when to listen, when to share, and when to hold back. Most importantly, she knew how to inspire trust. These skills slowly drew her closer to one of the prison guards, Scott Spitler. Scott was an ordinary corrections officer, a man with a wife and children, a stable job, and a routine life. But under Sarah's calculated influence, he became emotionally entangled. What began as professional interactions gradually shifted into a forbidden relationship, one that would change both of their lives forever. The relationship between Sarah and Scott began innocently enough. Small conversations during work hours. A question like, "How are you today?" a smile held just a second longer than usual. But for Sarah, every move was calculated. She began sharing stories of her struggles, her feelings of injustice, and her dreams of a second chance. Scott, emotionally vulnerable, started to sympathize with her. Sympathy turned into trust, and trust turned into intimacy. Behind the steel doors of Rockville, a secret romance was born. Sarah convinced Scott that she was different from the others, that she didn't belong in prison, that she was worth saving. And in his blinded devotion, Scott began to break rules. He smuggled small items to her, bent regulations in her favor, and eventually, the emotional connection crossed into the physical. Once that line was crossed, Scott was no longer just a guard. He had become a co-conspirator. The man whose job was to enforce the rules was now preparing to break the biggest one of all, helping a convicted murderer walk free. On August 24th, 2008, Sarah turned a forbidden romance into her ticket to freedom. The plan was shockingly simple. Scott drove a work vehicle into the facility, bringing civilian clothes for Sarah. She changed into the outfit, crawled under the vehicle, and quietly rode out of the prison grounds. No alarms, no gunfire, no daring climb over razor wire. A woman serving 110 years simply walked out the front gate of Rockville Correctional Facility, carried on the shoulders of misplaced trust. The disappearance sent shockwaves through the prison. Authorities scrambled, the media erupted, and soon the FBI was involved in the nationwide manhunt. But Sarah had already vanished into the city of Chicago, where she rented an apartment under a false identity. For 3 months, she lived as if she had slipped out of her past forever. But freedom won through betrayal rarely lasts. In December 2008, Sarah was tracked down and arrested in her Chicago apartment. There was no resistance, no dramatic chase, just a quiet end to the short-lived dream of freedom she had carved out through manipulation and forbidden love. When Sarah was taken back into custody, Scott Spitler could not escape justice either. He was charged with assisting in the escape and sentenced to prison himself. His career was over, his family shattered, his life ruined, all for a romance that had no future. For Sarah, legal teams attempted to argue for reduced sentences, even suggesting that her original conviction should have been for aiding and abetting rather than masterminding. But every appeal was denied. She remained bound to her 110-year sentence, now with additional time for the escape. The incident became a painful lesson for Indiana's prison system. It revealed not only flaws in supervision, but also the catastrophic risks when professional boundaries collapse. Sarah Jo Pender proved that a determined inmate doesn't always need weapons or riots to escape. Sometimes, all it takes is the heart of a single guard. The story of Sarah Jo Pender is more than just a prison escape. It is the dangerous intersection of love, manipulation, and abused authority. To society, Sarah became the embodiment of a cunning inmate who knew how to exploit every weakness in others to achieve her goals. To the correctional officers who once worked beside her, she remains a warning that the line between duty and desire is far thinner than the iron bars that surround a prison. Scott Spitler, once a trusted guard, once a man responsible for maintaining order, ultimately became a betrayer of the very system he was sworn to uphold. By falling into a forbidden relationship, he lost not only his job but his freedom, his family, and his reputation. The price of weakness was not his alone to bear. It left a stain on Indiana's correctional system as a whole. As for Sarah, though she tasted a few fleeting months of freedom, she ultimately returned to the place she was never meant to leave. Yet her name has remained a subject of controversy. Some see her as a master manipulator, a woman who weaponized affection to bend others to her will. Others, however, argue that she was also a victim of a harsh, legal system, one that imposed an excessively heavy sentence on a young woman. But no matter which perspective one adopts, the undeniable truth is this: 2 lives were taken in the 2000 murders, and later, one prison officer destroyed himself because of her influence. Sarah did not only ruin her own future, she dragged others into her spiral of tragedy. This case leaves behind haunting questions. Can prison systems truly prevent forbidden relationships? Can oversight and regulations be enough to restrain the human heart? And above all, can we ever fully trust those entrusted with the power to guard others? Perhaps the most profound lesson of Sarah Jo Pender's escape is this: the greatest betrayals often come from where we least expect them. A prison can build high walls, stretch coils of razor wire, and install cameras on every corner. But if the people inside the system fail to uphold their own integrity, then a single glance, a sweet promise, or a moment of weakness can open the gates to freedom. Today, Sarah's story is still used in correctional training programs as a case study in prison security. It stands as a vivid reminder that psychology and emotions can be just as dangerous as weapons or riots. It warns every future corrections officer that their duty is not only to guard others, but also to guard themselves against temptations that can dismantle everything. As the years pass, Sarah remains behind bars, and Scott Spitler lives with the ruins of his choices. The community that once trusted their sheriff's office still recalls the shock of betrayal. And history remembers the escape of Sarah Jo Pender not for its violence, but for its quiet, devastating simplicity. Her story will endure in the annals of crime, a stark example of how forbidden love within prison walls can unlock doors meant never to be opened.